All right. Well, as I'm going through this information, I will do my best to be monitoring the chat, but I really encourage you all, for those who feel comfortable, feel free to come off of mute. I want to make sure that I'm getting your questions answered as I go through this information. Okay. So kicking things off, let me share my screen and give me a thumbs up if you are able to see my screen. Should see resumes and cover letters. Fantastic. All right. So just out of curiosity, for those of you who are on the call, how many of you already have a resume of some sort drafted up? Okay, good. A good number of you. Okay, fantastic. So as we are going through this, there are going to be some specific resources, some specific tips and tricks that I'm going to be talking about. I have been meeting quite a bit with alumni and with folks who are kind of in this job search mode. And I've been meeting with a number of different students who are saying, like, I'm applying to these different positions. I'm not hearing back. I don't think I have the skill set to get a job. And 9 times out of 10, when we are breaking down their resources and really taking a look at what they're doing to support their job search, 9 times out of 10, there are usually formatting or some things related to their resume, which might be contributing to why the phone calls are not necessarily coming back. So we're going to talk about really ways to maximize your resume to improve the, the amount of callbacks that ideally you'll be receiving. Okay. So kicking things off, the overall goal of your resume is to get you an interview. A lot of times folks are under the presumption that your resume is what actually gets you the job. You actually get the job in the interview, but your resume is ultimately what they are using in order to determine if you are a good candidate to bring in for an interview. So really consider your resume to be a marketing tool where you're marketing your education, your relevant experience, your skills and accomplishments, and how you talk about your skills is going to be important. So with many resume templates, you might see that there's a position and then folks will just basically do, list every single thing that they did in the job. And it doesn't necessarily tell us your contribution or really what you brought to the job in that instance. So we're going to talk about ways to really structure your bullet points in a way that's going to be much more meaningful. A key element to your success is going to be the tailoring of your resume to each job that you are applying to. Normally, I will hear from students who will say, I'm sending out something like 20, 30 resumes, and no one is calling me back. And they're sending the same resume to multiple employers. Typically, students who do the tailoring, they are spending more time up front doing the tailoring. They're sending out fewer resumes, but they're getting a better response rate because when they're doing that tailoring, you've made it easier for not only the hiring manager to be able to identify that you meet the minimum qualifications, but you're also maximizing your ability to get through the applicant tracking system. So most HR departments use some sort of applicant tracking system to do the initial screening to determine if you meet minimum qualifications. And it scans your resume to look for a particular language, specifically language from the job description. So if you haven't incorporated enough language from that job description, you very well may be qualified, but the system isn't identifying you as being qualified. So we're going to talk about how to tailor your resume in a way that's going to support you and really how to read job descriptions as well to support you not only in the tailoring of your resume, but the prioritization in which you have things listed. So we'll talk about that as well. And then of course, the importance of knowing your audience and being able to incorporate some of that more industry specific terminology. Okay, so we move forward. So a couple of things to be aware of regarding your resume. So usually your resume is going to be about 1 page, 2 pages at the most. A lot of times as folks are crafting their resume, they'll have what they call their master resume. So consider your master resume to be kind of like your LinkedIn profile on paper, where it's just everything you've ever done, all the classes, all the projects, all of that. So you're going to have your master resume, and then you're going to have your tailored resumes, the ones that you're going to modify to each of the different employers. So, for your master resume, that's for your own use. That can be as long as you want it to be. But whatever you're sending out to an employer, you're usually going to have about a page, no more than 2 pages on your resume. Okay. I highly recommend having a very simplified text edit version of your resume. Avoid using templates. Here's why. Is applicant tracking systems are not really good at reading tables. They're not good at differentiating columns. So when I've been on the hiring manager side of things, I can always tell when a resume has been submitted and it's a heavily formatted resume, because what I receive on my end is a jumbled mess. Like columns merged together, images that may be on the resume will show up now as just question marks. It doesn't have the translation of what exactly you formatted your resume to look like. So if you do have a templated resume or really formatted resume, I would say save those for your interviews. So when you're actually able to share them with folks, it'll maintain the formatting that you're wanting to, versus trying to upload it in the applicant tracking system and it not maintaining that formatting becomes a lot harder for the employer to find what they're looking for, okay? We really wanna make sure you're maximizing the amount of real estate you're really using, because you're only limited to about a page or two. So we wanna make sure that we are maximizing it where we're really describing the skills that are gonna be most relevant to the job you're targeting. It's gonna be chronological, and it's actually gonna be reverse chronological. So we always start with your most recent and we work your way back, okay? Using bullet points in order of importance. So I recommend, there are some resume templates that will have bullet points. There are others that will have usually just, block paragraphs where you're just typing out your experiences. I recommend bullet points over block paragraphs because from the employer side of things, it's easier for me to find what I'm looking for if I'm scanning bullet points as opposed to trying to scan a block of text to find what I'm looking for, okay? So that is just a way to maximize your resume to make it a lot easier for an employer to follow. Okay? I will say first impressions are very, very important. I know several hiring managers, at the moment they start seeing grammar issues, they start seeing spelling issues, they're done, they move on. And so the thing to keep in mind is this is a writing sample. And so you want to make sure that as you are crafting it, get as many eyes on it as possible. I am really good at helping other people with their resume. I am not good at crafting my own. And so I normally have to get other folks to look at it, catch things that I have missed, all of those different things in order to make sure that if there's a spelling error, a typo, or, anything, I catch it before the employer does, okay? Bold and italicized where you want to bring their eye. Sometimes folks will use it too much and then I don't know what to pay attention to. So really kind of use bolding and italicized to just kind of focus in on those areas that you're wanting the employer to really see, okay? And then of course, being consistent with your punctuation, your fonts. A lot of times folks will try to play around with the font to try to get more onto the page. And so usually you want to keep your font to about 10 to 12, okay? If you're playing with the font and you're like, if I get it down to like 8 point, I can get more on the page. That's true, but then no one will be able to read it. So you want to make sure that it is still legible. But yeah, usually about a 10 to 12 font, you're usually good to go, okay? Before I get into the various sections of your resume, any questions so far? Okay, sounds good. So we begin with contact. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, Raphael, I have just one question. In your presentation, will you at all be mentioning the distinctions between CVs and resumes?
I will mention it towards the end. There really isn't too much distinction, with the exception of your CV will actually have more information than what would ever appear on your resume. And I'll show you some resources related to that.
Awesome.
Excuse me 1 second. Give me 1 second. I need to step away for just a moment, but I'll be right back.
I feel it's all pretty great info so far.
Awesome. I agree.
So sorry. I had a whining dog at my door that needed to get out. So, all right. So starting out, contact information at the top of your page. And I want to stress this, make sure it's at the top of your page, but do not include it in a header, because many applicant tracking systems cut off headers and footers. So there have been many times where folks are thinking like, oh, I'll put it in a header, it'll show up on every page. And what the employer sees is a list of jobs and responsibilities with no name. So I highly recommend keep it to the top, don't incorporate it into a header. You really just need your name, a phone number, an email address, and a link to your LinkedIn profile, should you have one. If you have a link to, say, another online portfolio, so let's say you've been working on some IT projects or something like that, and you've developed a portfolio that has evidence pieces of your work, that is also good to incorporate into the contact information part of your resume. Okay. You actually don't need physical addresses. So older templates will still have your whole physical address, but you actually don't need to have your physical address on there. You can incorporate your city and state, but that's really optional. As long as they're more than likely not going to be sending you physical mail. So as long as it's a good email, a good phone number, link to your LinkedIn. There's a question about what about a blog website? So I would say yes, provided that it is connected to the job that you're targeting. If it's just a blog that you've just sort of been keeping for your own personal element, it's not going to necessarily benefit you for an employer to share that. If it is a blog that is industry focused or focused on the types of work that you're targeting, then I would say yes, incorporate it. Okay. Have a professional looking email address. And so one of the things that I actually recommend is eventually after graduation, your UW email address will eventually go away. So I recommend just creating your own personal email address that you are using for your applications. Most folks will usually do some sort of variation of their name. But if you have a Gmail account, an Outlook account, something along those lines, that's what I would recommend. So then that way you don't have to worry about an expiration date to your email address. You'll still be able to get those emails even after you have graduated. Okay. Questions so far? Good question about the blog website. Okay. The next section is actually in replacement of the objective. So you might have seen some older resume templates that still have an objective, when now actually more and more current resumes do not have an objective anymore. They know your objective is to get a job with their company. What's taken its place is either a skills section or a summary of qualifications section, where you're basically identifying the specific skills and experiences that you are bringing to the table that is connected to the job that you're targeting. So this is probably going to be your most tailored section, because this is where you're really going to be looking at the job description, what skills and experiences are they prioritizing, and now you're incorporating that into this section. So if I'm an employer, I don't have to look any further than this section to recognize you meet minimum qualifications. So you want to highlight the skills that are specific to the job description, measure those experiences. So, if they're asking for, 3+ years customer service experience, that's what you want to identify. So they get a sense of where you fall in that. Okay. This can be in list form. It also can be in short paragraph form. I still recommend that list form. It makes it a lot easier for an employer to find what they're looking for. And for those of you who are thinking like, okay, well, I may have done like part-time job or maybe even full-time jobs while I was going to school, but it's not necessarily connected to the industry. What I would say is you want to focus on the skills that are most transferable from those jobs. So your teamwork skills, your communication skills, your problem solving skills, your ability to work with diverse groups of people, regardless of where you have done that, those are valuable experiences for an employer. If you were a manager, even if you were, a manager at a fast food or retail store, those are still good managerial skills to incorporate onto your resume. So recognize that as long as you have, work experience, volunteer experience, all of those things can certainly be, we can identify those transferable skills and incorporate them onto your resume. Okay. Highly recommend try to avoid the more general kind of skills. So for example, hard worker, that's great. Employers are going to want to see how you've demonstrated that and how you've described the rest of your work experience. So identifying yourself as a hard worker in the summary of qualifications, it's good, but it doesn't tell me a lot versus what I'll be reading in your bullet points. That's where I'm going to start getting a sense of what type of worker you are. So how you craft your bullet points is going to speak to that more than you just listing it in your summary of qualifications. Okay. This is also a good place for technical skills. So if you're applying a more technical focused job, this is a place where you would want to incorporate those, the hardware, the softwares, those platforms that you've been using throughout your education, throughout your career that are connected to the job. So this is ultimately what you'd be capturing in this section. Questions? Okay. So we move on. So your education section. So this is really where you are going to be capturing your degree, your college, your expected graduation date. You actually don't need to incorporate any high school information. It is the assumption that because you have your bachelor's degree, you have either your high school diploma or a GED. So really you just need to identify college level, bachelor's level and up, or associate's level rather and up, okay? Folks have asked a lot of questions around, do I need to incorporate my GPA? No, you actually don't need to incorporate your GPA. Eventually your GPA will fall off of your resume. If you have a high GPA, let's say you have a 3.5 or higher and you want to incorporate it, by all means, feel free. But eventually your GPA will fall off and most employers are not going to verify what your GPA was. So if you're nervous about your GPA, don't feel obligated to include it. It's not necessary, okay? If you're applying to graduate school, they may have different requirements now, and they may ask you to incorporate your GPA if they're asking you to submit a resume or a CV. So pay attention to those requirements, but more often than not, you're okay with not incorporating your GPA, okay? In the absence of work experience, a lot of times as I'm meeting with students, it's the thought of, well, I don't have a lot of work experience, or if I do have work experience, it's not in the industry. So what should I be putting? Well, in the absence of work experience, where we focus is on your education. What have been the courses that you have taken and the projects that you've completed that have prepared you for whatever these next steps are, okay? So in this example, we have these courses highlighted. This is a study abroad experience, but let's say you were working in a particular course where you noticed that you were able to really do a lot of the skills and have the experiences that are being asked in the job description. Similar to how this is structured, you would identify the name of the course, you would identify the institution, and then a few bullet points regarding what you did in the course. Now, I want to stress this a bit different. Most times when folks are kind of putting relevant coursework, they'll add bullet points that describe the class and what the class covered, but it doesn't tell me what you actually did. So as opposed to saying, we discussed such and such topic, it would be more along the lines of, conducted research in the process of developing a research paper, presented to a group of 20 students, results of my research findings, things like that, where you're talking more about the skills that you demonstrated in the class versus giving me descriptions of what the class was about. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay. It's about identifying the classes that are most relevant to the jobs that you're targeting. So it's not adding every single course that you've taken as part of your undergraduate education, but more specifically, if there are particular expectations or regarding experience or regarding knowledge around software or platforms, in those bullet points, that's where you want to describe how you develop those experiences in your classes, okay? This is also a great place for study abroad experience, certificate programs, other technical training that you may have done. You can certainly incorporate that into your education section. So, again, there's quite a bit of room to play with here. If you are thinking, don't have a lot of work experience, completely okay, then we focus on your education. Okay. When you're focusing on your coursework, a lot of times folks are asking the question, well, what should I be focusing on? What are employers even looking for when it comes to recent college graduates? So the National Association of Colleges and Employers, which is a professional association that we are a part of at UW-Bothell, they surveyed employers across industries, asking what are the skills that you most need to see in recent college graduates' resumes? And they identified these areas as the things that they are most needing to see. Top one being problem-solving skills, ability to work in a team, strong work ethic, your analytical or quantitative skills, your communication skills, your leadership, your verbal skills, your initiative, detail orientation, and then your technical skills are really the top 10 qualities that they are looking for in recent college graduates' resumes. So when you're thinking about that coursework, or you're thinking about that part-time job that you had while going to school, or that volunteer experience that you had going to school. What are those skills that you're going to want to pull out? You want to identify these areas, because of the fact that with my discussion with employers, these skills are harder to train towards. It's if you are not already coming in knowing how to engage with a team, if you're already coming in and you don't know how to communicate effectively, it's harder for me to get you where I need you to be. Versus if you have all of these skills and I need to just get you up to speed on a particular hardware or software or platform, it's going to be easier for me to get you where you need to be. I can train you on the rest. It's harder to train to these. So when you're identifying those transferable skills that we're talking about, these are the skills that you're identifying, okay? The thing to keep in mind is, and again, and when you're thinking about your relevant courses, these are all skills you've already been demonstrating. These are all skills that you all as college students have already been refining. One of the things too regarding leadership is a lot of times folks will assume that you need to be in a leadership position in order to demonstrate leadership, which actually is not true. So if you have been that person, you've been working in group projects and you were the person in the group project to say, you know, we need to get ourselves organized. Let's come up with a timetable. Let's distribute work. You've demonstrated leadership. Now it's just about articulating that onto your resume. Okay. So recognize many times as folks are coming in, they're thinking, I don't have skills to put on my resume. You actually have quite a few skills to put on your resume. Now it's just about how do we focus them. Work experience. So this is, of course, where everybody is focusing their attention, but recognize what is actually able to go into work experience. This is where you're going to capture your full-time job, your part-time jobs. You can capture internships, volunteer opportunities, on-campus involvement, as well as your professional work experience. So there's a number of different places where we can pull and identify work experience, okay? In this there is a great resource that I like to recommend called Job Hero, jobhero.com. I'll add that to the chat. It is basically a library resource of a number of different resumes. And the reason I want to bring your attention to it is just so you can see examples of how people talk about their work. Because it's a whole library of different resumes, I would avoid, you know, taking their resumes and using it as your own. There are some outdated resumes on there. So it's not so much so you can get an idea of resume templates, but more so how are folks describing similar work to give you some of that language and how you're describing it. So when you are describing your work, you're able to be a bit more detailed. Most times folks will put, you know, provided customer service, worked at a clinic, you know, did opening and closing. And that's great, but as an employer, that doesn't necessarily tell me a lot. So we want to make sure that as you're crafting your bullet points, you're being as descriptive as possible. And we'll talk about how to do that in just a little bit. But the way to actually start that process is to actually use action verbs. So as opposed to saying, I did this process, you're going to actually lead with the action verb. So conducted research, wrote papers, facilitated discussions, led presentations. So you're leading with the action and then getting into the descriptor of what you actually did, okay? Wherever you can quantify, even better. So employers love to save time and they love to save money. And if you have in previous jobs found a way to make things go faster, you found a way to just improve efficiency, you found a way to meet more customers, earn more money, all of those things, great additions to have to your resume, okay? So for those, for example, who are working with customers, start thinking on average, how many customers are you managing? How much of your day-to-day is actually working on tickets or working on these different problems? And that way an employer can get a sense of the depth of work that you have done as a part of this opportunity or this experience that you're identifying on your resume. Okay. When we're talking about bullet points, this is what I mean by being descriptive. So ultimately, there are three things that you're wanting to capture in your bullet points that you're crafting, okay? The first one is, what did you do? So this is usually what folks will capture. Assisted customer, forecast monthly sales, program database search bar system. That's great. That gives me some description. How did you do what you do? So as opposed to just saying, I assisted customers by providing friendly and patient customer services. I forecasted monthly sales by analyzing historical data, utilizing Excel data analysis option, program database and search bar systems using C++. So now I not only get a sense of what you did, I get a sense of the tools and the resources that you used as well. So if for example, the job description is looking for you to have experience with C++, this gives me an idea of how you've used it, okay? And then ultimately, what was the end result, or why did you do the work that you do? So I assisted customers by providing friendly and patient customer service to increase 20% of purchases monthly. So when we talk about quantifying, this is an example of that, where you're able to show how you were able to increase purchases, okay? The second example, to predict future stock levels. So you're basically doing what you're creating this for the purpose of being able to, again, be kind of predict elements of the future, ideally saving time, ideally saving money. Program database search bar system using C++ to integrate convenient user-friendly interface. So these bullet points that incorporate these three elements give a much richer perspective of not just what you did, but how you did it, and really just what was the end result of your work, okay? These do take a bit more time to craft, but again, you make it much, much easier for an employer to get a sense of what exactly you have done and really get a sense of kind of how you approach the work that you do, okay? Any questions about that? Okay. There's a couple of things too that you can incorporate to really kind of show your continued knowledge, your continued education. So again, those trainings, those things that you have gone to, but just an FYI, as UW students, you actually have free access to LinkedIn Learning. So for those who have not had an opportunity to explore this, you just need a standard LinkedIn profile, as long as you just have your basic profile, and you would go to linkedinlearning.uw.edu. I'm adding that to the chat. And basically, as long as you have your net ID, you're able to get free access to LinkedIn Learning, which has something like 5,000 video tutorials. Those certificates of completion can actually go onto your LinkedIn profile should you have one. So great addition to show an employer what your continued education has been after your degree. When they ask you, what are you doing to keep your skills current? This is a good resource to most certainly identify, okay? Just wanted to throw that out there. Okay, so whenever you are crafting your resume, the main thing to use is that job description. So here's the thing. When employers are writing job descriptions, consider that to just be the employer wish list. They are basically putting everything onto the page that they would ever want out of a candidate, and they recognize that, you know, they are hoping to get someone who has all those qualities. But more than likely, you know, as long as someone meets the majority of them, they're worth exploring. So whenever you're taking a look at a job description, first things first, what are the top 3 to 5 requirements? They have their desired and then they have their preferred. So really, when you're taking a look at like what is required, what are those main things that they are looking for? In addition to that, what are the keywords that are showing up most often? That will help you determine what do I need to prioritize and how do I need to talk about it, okay? The more you're able to use those keywords in your resume, the more likely it will navigate that applicant tracking system. There's a great resource that I like to use called JobScan. JobScan.co is the website. And what JobScan allows you to do is it allows you to actually upload a version of your resume. Then you can upload the job description for the job that you're targeting, and it does a keyword match for how many keywords are showing up in the job description, how often are they showing up, and then how many of those same keywords are showing up on your resume, okay? And it gives you what's called a match rate score. So JobScan will say you need a match rate score of something like 80% or higher. I genuinely have not met anybody who has gotten that high. Normally I've gotten folks to get into like the 50th, 60th percentile. But basically what they're doing is they're not doing a direct copy and paste from the job description into their resume, not doing that, but more so in how they're describing what they're doing, they're just using the language from the job description. They're using those keywords. So for example, let's say you have all this language on your resume about you're a great team player and the role that you play on a team, and you're really good at teamwork. And the job description uses the language collaboration and collaborate. They mean the same thing, but your resume may not get picked up because it's specifically looking for the language collaboration and collaborate. So often when folks are saying like, I don't think I have the qualifications. No, actually you do, but how it's written on your resume, the applicant tracking system and the employer isn't getting a sense that you actually meet the minimum qualifications because they're not finding their language. So that's ultimately what you're wanting to focus on. The other thing to identify is similar to that chart that I shared before around those percentages of what employers are looking for. What are those career competencies? So career competencies is basically those categories of things that employers are looking for. Critical thinking and problem solving, your communication skills, your teamwork skills, your leadership, your professionalism. When they say global and intercultural fluency, it's basically a way of just saying you're able to work with diverse groups of people, okay? Career management is your own knowledge of your strengths and your growth areas, and then your knowledge of digital technology, okay? So this job description analysis is really going to support you to determine what needs to be in your resume, in what priority order does it need to appear on your resume, and how do you need to talk about the skills that you are bringing to the table, okay? So using that job description is going to be a good way of helping you prioritize and know what to incorporate, okay? Any questions so far?
Not a question, but I use JobScan at your guys's recommendation, and I really found it to be very, very helpful.
Good.
So much so that I actually went ahead and like purchased, like they have a free version, then they have like the premium version. I went ahead and purchased the premium version. I mean, it really is a great, great tool.
Oh, fantastic. That is wonderful. They do, yes, and they have the free version. They do have the paid version that is available to you. So to use it, you don't actually have to pay for it, but should you choose to, then by all means, I agree. It is a very useful resource in just helping you start to identify what are they prioritizing. Because sometimes, again, when you start going and doing that keyword search, you realize they're repeating some words often. So it's going to be important for that to actually appear in your resume. Okay. Thank you so much for that, Nathan. Great point. Okay, so a couple of things. First off, making sure your resume is easy to read and consistent. Making sure that when we're talking about consistent, your formatting for your education section should mirror the formatting of your experience section. So all of those in regards to kind of, where I'm drawing my eye should be consistent. Dates lined up on the right-hand side is usually a good approach, okay? Maximize space. So if you're noticing that the resume is kind of going onto another line and it's only like 1 or 2 words really kind of going onto the other line, let's try to edit that so that way we're not wasting space for just like a word or 2, okay? Keep it to 1 page, 2 pages if you have a lot of experience, doing the spelling and grammar check, making sure you're using the correct verb tense as well. So any past experience should be written in past tense. I organized, I collaborated, I led, versus what you are currently doing, then you are using that in present tense, okay? So being mindful of how you're structuring your resume, and then of course, tailoring your resume to use words from the position description, okay? So before I move on to cover letters, something I want to share are some resources to support you in your resume development. So let me actually grab this and move this over so you can find what I'm looking for. Okay, so from our UW Bothell homepage, if you just go to current students, 3rd column under student affairs is careers, okay? So this is where you would come to access our career page. Here's where for UW Bothell students, you're able to schedule an appointment with us. But for any of you, even who are not UW Bothell students, you're still able to access these resources. So where I want to bring your attention right here is to resumes. Okay. So here, you're actually going to find some sample resumes to support you in developing and crafting your resumes. There are a list of action verbs here. So sometimes trying to find different ways of saying the same thing can be a bit challenging. And so using this list, it's just a downloadable Word document. Let that open. Sorry, it's just taking a moment. There we go. So as you're trying to find, again, different verbs to describe what it is that you did, this is a good starting point. So for example, if you're looking for different ways of just saying you researched, there's a number of different categories to go along with that, okay? Or another different verbs to go along with that category rather, okay? So this is a good starting place if you're just needing some support around the verbiage. Okay? This is also where you're able to identify some resources related to your CV. So very briefly, so you are aware, your CV is basically your master resume, if you will. Usually you're going to be using a CV, and so CV is course or curriculum vitae, as it is called, means course of life. So basically it's capturing everything that you've pretty much done throughout your education. But if you notice, it's structured similarly to how you would structure a resume. But the difference is this is where you're going to be incorporating publications. You're going to be incorporating presentations. You're going to be incorporating professional affiliations, service and campus involvement. So it really is your resume max, where you're incorporating far more information. You'll usually need a CV if you're applying to graduate school or you're applying to positions in higher education. That's usually the main places where you'll need a CV. But most places, most employers are fine with just a simple resume. Graduate programs will say you can either submit a resume or a CV, but I do say for those of you who are exploring graduate programs, make sure to verify what they're expecting, because if they're needing a CV and you send in a resume, you're not meeting the requirements. So you want to make sure that you are meeting what it is that they're asking. And with the CV, you don't have the same 1 to 2 page requirement. So I've seen CVs to get up to 6, 7, 8 pages because you're incorporating everything. So if you don't need a CV, then you don't necessarily need to go to the effort of actually capturing all of these things. But if you do know you're going to be applying to graduate school, they're requiring a CV, or you know you're pursuing opportunities in higher education, such as research or teaching, then more than likely a CV is going to be something that you're going to want to incorporate. But structurally, it's going to follow the same template as you would a resume, where you identify the experience and then have some points underneath it really describing in a little bit more depth. Okay. Any questions about CVs? I know we're not spending too much time on CVs, but anything else? Questions? Should resume be made separately for each job to emphasize job capability? So yes, ultimately, you're going to be tailoring your resume to each job that you're applying to. So you may have one resume that you're kind of working off of. So that's kind of for your own benefit. You have everything. But then when you're completing your resume to actually submit for a job, you're going to want that resume tailored to each job.
And then I think the second part of the question was following up on, so resumes are tailored for each job, but a CV, it would not be. It's just, the CV just captures everything, and that's what you send to anyone asking for a CV?
Correct. Yes. Yes. So yes, the CV would be cumulative. Yes, it would capture everything. You would not be doing the same level of tailoring. If anything, the tailoring that you would do on your CV would really just be reordering of sections. So if you know, like you're targeting a teaching position, then you probably don't want your teaching experience to be on the 5th page. You probably want that to be first, and then you work your way back from there. So, but in how you're kind of describing things, that will pretty much be pretty consistent on your CV. Should we start by making a CV and then removing unnecessary information for a resume for a specific job? I would say start making a CV if you feel like you're going to need a CV, then yes. Otherwise, I would say just structure it as if it's going to be your resume, but you don't necessarily, for your master resume, you're not going to need to keep it to 1 to 2 pages, because that's just, for your reference. So you are not having to recreate the wheel every time you're tailoring your resume. You can just now take these sections, move them over, and structure them as you need to. So I would say crafting a master resume for yourself is what I would recommend. Difference between a master resume and a CV. CV is going to capture teaching experience. It's going to capture publications. It's going to capture service industry, all of those things. Your resume is going to be really your education and your relevant experience. So you're not going to have to capture presentations that you've done, research that you've completed, publications that you've completed. That is going to be more CV focused. Resume is going to be more work education focused. Does that make sense?
So you could, like, you know, depend, like, let's say, you know, you were qualified to be pursuing an academic, upper academic position, but you maybe also you have interest in pursuing, you know, like the private sector, then you could make an argument for needing both.
Correct.
A CV and a master resume as distinct documents.
Correct. Yep, absolutely. If you know, though, that you're not going to be going into research, you're not going to be going into teaching, you're not going to be targeting higher education, then you may not necessarily need to go to the effort of crafting a full CV when just having a resume will suffice. Okay. I know that's a bit confusing, so I just kind of want to make sure, like, if folks are clear with that, or if there are any other questions regarding the difference between CV and resume. Okay, all good. Last thing to touch base on, and then certainly opening up for some questions, are cover letters. So in addition to your resume, some employers may require or have optional a cover letter, okay? Ultimately, what the goal of a cover letter is to get folks to look at your resume. So whenever you're submitting these documents, recognize what they are used for. The cover letter is to get folks to take a look at your resume. Your resume is to get folks to want to bring you in for an interview. And then during the interview, you get the job, okay? So whenever you're kind of crafting a cover letter, you're basically just talking about how you learned about the position, how you learned about the organization, and you're convincing the reader to take a look at your resume, okay? This is your opportunity to kind of call to attention things that you're not able to really describe on your resume. So again, your resume, you're only going to have about a page, no more than 2 pages. So that's a limited amount of space for you to, you know, be descriptive about what it is that you did. Your resume now is your opportunity to elaborate. If there is maybe a project or something that you did and you're thinking like, you know, I have a limited amount of space in resume, but I really want to talk about this more, your cover letter is where to do that, okay? It gives you an opportunity to reflect your attitude and your interest in the position, and you're able to tell just a richer story. So whenever you are given the option to complete a cover letter, more and more tech companies, for example, are doing away with the cover letter. There are some that are making it optional. If it's optional, I still recommend doing it. It's one additional resource to advocate on your behalf. And again, it gives you that opportunity to just express your enthusiasm and your passion for the role that you don't have that opportunity on your resume because you're primarily just describing your experiences and your skills that make you qualified, okay? So in developing a cover letter, that is another resource that is available to you. So on the left-hand side of our menu options on our career webpage, under resumes is cover letters. And this initial cover letter outline is actually what I use the most in my appointments. So this example, basically paragraph by paragraph breaks it down as to what information you're needing to include. So you're structuring it as if it is a formal letter. I highly recommend doing some research. So if you can identify the name of the hiring manager, that's great. It shows that you've done your homework. If you have to do something like, you know, to whom it may concern or dear hiring committee, that's okay. But if you're able to get a name, even better. And then paragraph by paragraph, it breaks it down as to what you're needing in your cover letter. So opening paragraph, this is the position I'm applying for. I'm excited for the role. This is where I found it. Second paragraph, you're basically describing what makes you qualified for the position. So you're highlighting experiences, you're highlighting skills that you're bringing to the table that make you a good candidate for the position. Third paragraph, you're talking about why you're a good fit for the company as a whole. So most folks, when they're crafting their cover letter, they tend to only focus on the position. Whereas this is taking it a step further. So if ever you are researching a company, you're researching the position, get a sense of what the company's history, mission, values, core tenets are, all of those. So as you're crafting your cover letter, you're basically talking about why you want to work for that company, okay? And that's what you're really wanting to highlight. And then fourth paragraph, thank you so much for your time. You're bringing that all home, okay? Where you're able to find the cover letter template again. So from our career page under current students, clicking on careers, left-hand menu, you'll see cover letters under resumes. And what I'm talking about is the cover letter outline. Okay, there are other sample cover letters for you here, but this was the one that I mainly recommend because it basically breaks it down paragraph by paragraph. Okay. So with that, that brings me to the end of my presentation around cover letters and resumes. We do have a few more minutes left, so I would love to open it up to see what questions do folks have, anything that I didn't cover that folks are curious about. Feel free to come off of mute or add to the chat. Give me a thumbs up if we are good to go. Oh, good. How would you compare a cover letter with a letter of intent? So I'm understanding, are we talking about a letter of intent for a graduate program as opposed to a cover letter for a job?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. The difference is when you're writing a cover, they basically do the same thing. Ultimately, what you're doing in the cover letter is you're arguing why you're a good fit. Same with the letter of intent. You're arguing why you are a good fit. And so really the difference would be for the cover letter, you're really focusing on these are the skills and experiences that make me a good fit for this job and for this company. Letter of intent now is really more, a lot of times when folks are crafting their letter of intent for graduate school, their focus is mainly how that graduate school program can help them achieve their future goals. When you're arguing two things, yes, how the program is a good fit for you and how it's going to help you accomplish what it is that you want to do, but also you're arguing why you're a good fit for the program as well. So that way you are showing you've done your homework and that you have the skills and the experiences that make you a strong candidate for that graduate program. So ultimately you would you're basically making an argument for fit. But I think the difference would be with cover letter, you're really kind of honing in on that job and the company versus the letter of intent. Now you're kind of talking about why you're a good fit for the academic program and why the academic program is a good fit for you. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're very welcome. Great, great. Other questions? I know sometimes folks have questions around kind of like preparation for grad school versus career. Anything related to that?
Going once? Going twice?
All good. All right. Well, then the last thing that I will do is adding to the chat, I'm adding my email address. So for those of you who, whether you are UW Bethel student or not, if you are wanting just some additional information or you have some additional questions following this presentation, by all means, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to address whatever questions you have. But with that, I'll pass things over back to Nathan. Thank you all so much.